Thanks a lot, Deepak. In fact, it's indeed a pleasure this Saturday morning to host this panel and moderate this esteemed set of panelists. A lot of them, whom I have been colleagues with or shared, dais and screen with. So it's great, and in a way, surreal to kind of been doing this webinars in the last 2-3 months. But that's the new way of life. Before I kick it off, I would like to start with a huge sense of gratitude. We are all privileged, people out here who are speaking, who are probably, listening to the call. We have a roof on our head. We have a food on our plate. And this pandemic has displaced and disrupted quite a few. The United Nations believes that if it's not handled well, and then by all means, you can see that it's not being handled well. And I'm not taking a dig at anyone. It's just the inexperience that we've never seen a crisis of such magnitude in our lifetimes. That we could potentially push about 400 million people into poverty, that we could potentially wipe out 20 to 30 years of development that we have done as a human race. That is the challenge that we actually face today. We've all seen lots of crises, lots of disruptions. Most of the disruption that we have seen is something which either hits a particular industry or a continent, or a segment. So it could be a SARS, which could be geographically, or Ebola, which could be geographically limited to some part of the world. It could be a financial crisis that could hit, and reverberate the whole financial economy, or it could be disruptions on technology, displacing a few companies here and there. But we've never seen something as massive, as global, and as significant as Corona in our lifetimes, which has a human, it has an economic, and it has a global impact across the world. Which one of us forecasted at the beginning of the year that crude will go negative? How many of us thought that the GDP growth this year, next year, of all countries, including India, would go negative? How many of us ever thought that we would have Olympics or Tokyo, or the Wimbledon, cancelled for that matter? Or for that matter, how many of us thought that the skies would suddenly, be short of any flights and there will be a complete standstill of international travel? About 75% of international travel, or all flights, I would say there are very few flights that were continuing to run in the US, but barring that, most flights were all, grounded. None of this were forecast by us. So we are entering into an era which is unprecedented. It is a crisis. I believe it's going to be temporary, but it's going to be indefinite. And it will have those characteristics. And I can tell you one thing, for people on the call, if you feel confused, and I keep speaking to many leaders, and if you feel confused about the situation, then you have perfectly understood the situation. Quite often people get back and then say, oh my God, I am confused about the situation, so probably I'm not good enough. No, that is exactly the state we are in. And as long as we acknowledge this, and then move forward, is probably the first start. With all these uncertainties around it, I still believe doing nothing is not a strategy. Ostrich emulation is not a strategy, and we need to do something about it. And this series today, we are going to talk about specifically, capital. And I have, my good friends and, and colleagues, here to enlighten us on elements of, how to preserve your capital. Just because we are CFOs, I don't want us to be myopic, and I don't want any of you to judge that we are only good at, managing the numbers, side of the business. While we have a primary responsibility as functional leaders to manage the P&L and balance sheet and the long-term strategy of the company, we also have a shared responsibility along with the CEO and the board to manage the long-term health and performance of the company as well. So I believe there are two other elements of capital that every CXO needs to pay attention, not just a CFO. And it is the human capital, because there are companies which obviously have employees to run them. And if you cannot manage your employees, all this pandemic will one day wear off. You want them to be hale and healthy and come back, to become productive and contribute to the organization. So if you don't pay attention to the human capital at this stage, then it's going to be at your peril. And as CFOs, we need to ensure that we provide the right amount of resources, stimulus, and support, organizational support to be able to manage that element of the capital. The next element of the capital is the social capital, which is basically nothing but the trust capital that we have as an organization. Each one of these CFOs represent, a strong brand name, and all of us as consumers have, consumed their brand with that inherent trust. Just because there is a pandemic is no excuse for us to walk away from that trust. In fact, this is exactly the time we need to reinforce that trust and build, for it with our consumers. So that is a sneak preview of what's the discussion going to be all up to whet your appetite so that we can get you, to stay engaged. I'm now going to, hand over the baton to my colleagues here. Before we start on, probably I will ask each one of them to talk their top of mind for 5 minutes. Give us a sneak peek into their industry, their company, their specific challenges that they are actually facing, as a result of this pandemic, and how they are overcoming, those challenges. We will deep dive, a bit more going on, but first I would like to know what's, their top of mind. We will go in the order in which, the slide is there. So I'd ask Anand to go first, then followed by, Harshal, and then Manas, and then Nitin, and then Sanjay. So we will just take, each of yours, first 5 minutes. As Deepak said, I think he's done a great job of selecting not just prolific and eminent speakers here, but also selecting a wide spectrum of industries, from people who have got their business coming to a standstill and need to rethink almost anything and everything, question every gospel, to some companies who have been, comparatively less, impacted. So that's the lovely panel that we have here. So I hand over the baton to Anand. Anand, over to you.